Welcome to NeuroNoodle's Neurofeedback and Neuropsychology podcast featuring tech legend Jake Gunkelman. He's the man who has read well over 500,000 brain scans, and Dr. Marie Swingle, author of iMinds. Our goal is to provide information and promote options for better mental health. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/neuronoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you.
Hey.
Anthony Ramos on a Thursday show?
Hey there.
Jake Gunkelman.
Hey there.
Look who we got here, Jake.
Flashback to yesterday.
It's a party.
I never left. No, yeah. We never left.
We're putting some shows in the can because we got holidays coming up. So, and then here's Anthony Ramos, who at the very end caught a question from one of our loyal viewers and listeners, Heeda, every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific.
Plug it away.
Anthony, go ahead. Why don't you read that question? We love your.
Oh man, I don't have it up on the screen. I apologize.
Go into the.
Was this the mast cell question?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was. What is the EEG in mast cell? Thank you. Good memory.
Let me read it.
There's two kinds.
Okay.
There's an idiopathic kind. But they're probably referring to mast cell activation syndrome, which is a different thing than idiopathic. And they can cause anaphylactic reactions. It's the mast cell is a form of white blood cell, and it goes rogue. And when it goes rogue, it provides aberrant neurochemicals to the brain. Primarily histamine is the one that ends up being the worst of it, and it's an excitatory neurotransmitter. It causes an inflammatory response, and it's a vascularly active chemical, and it quite often causes really nasty headaches. Cluster headaches are a form of histamine headache. Mast cell activation can give you brain fog as kind of the least of its intensities, all the way to severe headaches with the histamine. But again, it can trigger an anaphylactic, which it can kill you. An anaphylactic reaction, you can lose the ability to breathe, and that's not very good. I knew you got to keep doing that.
Can you explain mast cell activation effects on the EEG and the possible connection to seizures? That's what you're excitatory
neurotransmitter. And if you have an underlying seizure disorder that may be subclinical, and we talked yesterday about a lot of that kind of thing where people aren't having a seizure, but their brain's got a discharge. Well, if you toss more excitatory neurotransmitter chemicals in there, you might create enough of a network to involve the motor strip and actually create your first ever seizure, although you may have been subclinical before. Mast cell activation can end up causing excitatory changes, and that can end up potentiating, probably not creating out of whole cloth. I mean, you've probably got to have a kind of a seed of a discharge there for it to activate.
Okay.
Although anaphylactic, that'll get you. So
let's see. We had some. Now Zoom has this feature of you can use an AI companion. So I take what our viewers asked and I say, hey, what would be interesting since we've been doing this for about 5 years? We got to. Who knows what's interesting? Jay's heard this a gazillion times. So AI says I should say, hey, Jay, we had some really heated discussion yesterday about auto thresholding. Josh raised some strong concerns about aggressive versus dampening auto thresholding, linking it to failed double-blind studies and artifact issues. You made that great analogy about the coach who keeps lowering the high jump bar. With Anthony here today, I'd love to get both of your perspectives for practitioners choosing between auto thresholding and fixed thresholding. What should they be looking for to make that decision? How do we address those concerns about training reliability when the thresholds keep shifting? Wow.
Well, is there a case for auto thresholding?
TLDR.
Yay, I mean,
Too long, didn't read.
There's a place for auto thresholding.
okay.
Quite often, it can be used effectively at the beginning of a session to set the thresholds appropriate to the EEG that's present at the beginning of the session. But the therapist should be looking at that, because you might come in with a high amount of EMG, and if you set a threshold to suppress the beta that's influenced by EMG, you can have a goofy threshold. But the fixed thresholding basically is, instead of auto thresholding, setting a limit. It's basically the therapist setting it. And you have to suppress the slow content and the fast content and train up some band in between. So you've got to have thresholds. Your thresholds have to basically make the feedback make sense. You can't provide no feedback because there's no learning then. So your suppressed bands can't catch everything and turn everything off. You've got to have them catch enough of what you're trying to suppress, but not turn off the feedback. So there's a dance as to how where you set it. If you set it appropriately with a fixed level, you have to pay attention to change over time. A coach would end up, if you're clearing the high bar with ease, they will move it up. And give you a new target to learn to exceed. If you're not ever clearing the bar, they're going to have to figure out a way for you to not look like a damn fool on the field, and they'll have to set a new level so you can actually have some success. If you have a client in the chair and you're providing very low percent of the time they're getting a positive reinforcement of some feedback, that's frustrating. And for some people, that difficult task, their personality is that they will knuckle down and they will get it. But for other people, if they're not getting sufficient reinforcement, they'll say, I give up. So it depends upon the client that you're dealing with and the amount of artifact or signal that you're suppressing outside of the training band. And if you reinforce at about 60% of the time they're getting some sort of a positive reinforcement, you're probably setting your thresholds about right. But again, there are people that are knuckled down with a difficult task, 35, 40% of the time. That's fine for them. They just need something. They don't need it all the time. But there are people, again, that have frustration tolerance that need to have constant feedback. Pardon me. I wake up in the morning dehydrated.
Yeah. Get a sip.
And
we had a bunch of stuff come up on multiple sclerosis and white matter demyelination, dartboard lesions, and all that.
Well, I had something for Jay. Already the subclinical epileptic discharges have come up again in regard to mast cell. And so I was speaking with someone, and they were curious what was the paper that you mentioned. But I think you said you authored a paper with Swatton that showed that up to 80% of autistics have these subclinical discharges. I was curious how I can better find that.
That's a meta-analysis of lots of studies, and the percentages ranged. The high percentage was over 1,000 patients, but they did 24-hour EEGs, including sleep, and they found 85%. It wasn't uncommon for others to find 50%, 60%, but that was a very high one. If you average them all around, it came out at about 70%, but there was the influence of this 85%, as a percentage. None of the studies that were in the meta-analysis were really small studies. They were actually fairly good sized. Hundreds of clients, and that's this one with over 1,000. And you basically end up seeing in a bunch of different disorders the background percentage, and again the ADD ADHD around 30 or so. But this meta-analysis for the autism ended up having a large number of studies that were averaged together, including this one very, very large one. And in that paper, there's also a table from Ron Swatton has his own database of just shy of 2,000 people, I think, in it, and they were actually cases that I did all the reports on. So it's his data set that he's got de-identified, and the IRB allows research access to it. And if the researcher has a query about the database, he can reverse engineer stuff, but not to identify somebody. But if you have a question about the data set, it can actually be it's an addressable data set, and it was the source of the beta spindle study on insomnia. The research domain criteria people say they don't want any DSM, they just want some biomarker and what it corresponds with. So we said, well, beta spindles, and they had 300 and something people with beta spindles. 100 and something of those were ADD ADHD. We found CZ to be insomnia, the frontal stuff to be impulsivity hyperactivity, and but but not necessarily a DSM category. And Ron's got a unique data set, and in the paper that's talk about percentage of epileptiform content, he's got a table of the different categories of clients they had in the office, and what their percentage was, how many of them at what age, and all that. So it's got a lot of data in it. It breaks it down by age categories and whatnot. So it's a paper well worth taking a peek at.
I think I found it. It was a study of individualized medicine and clinical practice on medication failure, 2014.
That's a different one.
Okay.
That's basically, once he got the de-identified data set together, he was all excited. He called me and said, Jay, we got the IRB approval. We can now do research. What should we do? And I said, well, your psychiatrist is a unique psychiatrist. He gets referrals from other psychiatrists who have patients that they fail to find a medication that could work. So they're medication failure referrals. And what we need to do is take all of those medication failure referrals and look at the EEG patterns that they had at admission, and do a cluster analysis and add another cluster and another cluster and another cluster until when you add a cluster, it doesn't make sense. And they found 4 EEG groups that made good sense. Now, the original paper was done by Ron and myself, but it was redone more recently, and I think they ended up with a finer analysis, and I think they had to have an epileptologist or something on on the author list in order for it to get into the journal and print the pictures. But anyway, that's a different study. The meta-analysis from I, well, let me see if I can just pull it up and do a screen share here. And
Yeah, I would love if I could get the title on that paper, if nothing else.
okay, and let me. I gotta close out a couple of headers because it'll flash up when I do the screen share. So here's the paper. Isolated epileptiform activity in children and adolescents, their prevalence, relevance, and implications for treatment. And again, this is based off of a huge meta-analysis. So if you get into the paper a little bit, this is the autism spectrum group. John Hughes found 30%,
Love it.
excuse me, this is the ADD ADHD group, 30%, 25%. The low percentage is actually a study that Martijn Arns and I did together, but he had 2-minute EEGs. And there's a minimum time standard for a reason. If you take short EEGs, you have less chance of catching a transient. And the 2-minute EEGs found a low percentage, 4%, but everybody else found much higher percentage. This is the autism group, and you can see the percentages here, including this one, uh, 870 out of 1,014 subjects. And they did 24-hour studies. They did a full 24-hour EEG, which is how you end up finding more discharges. Again, in a known epileptic, if you do a 20-minute study, 20 to 30 minutes is the minimum time standard, so 20 minutes is the bare minimum. You have only a 55% chance, just a little over half a chance of catching a discharge in a known epileptic. So, when you get a short study, you don't see very many discharges, and a lot of people run short studies. So anyway, this 24-hour study got 85% of them had epileptiform content. But all of these are pretty good sized studies. You can see there's an 85 and 86, but there's over 100 in quite a few of these studies. And Ron in the group that we did, he found 36%. But when you average all of these together, it's skewed a bit high because of the well done, very large study. And again, people are quoting 60, 70% quite easily with some support in the literature here.
Hey, Jay, I have a question for you. How long would an EEG need to be to catch, say, 95% of folks with epileptiform?
Well, that's why they do those 24 and 48-hour studies.
I know if you have it endless, yeah. But I mean, our standard is 20. We're much better than the hospital. But for a private practice or even non-perfect conditions, how long would you
I wouldn't do less than a 20-minute EEG if it's the first EEG you're doing. Because you really do minimize your chances of seeing a diagnostic discharge. You may see subtle abnormalities that are nonspecific, but if you want to catch something that's diagnostic, you've got to have enough time to have a chance of catching it. As I mentioned this chart as this is the age range, and this is the number out of the kids in this age range. This is the number that had epileptiform content, and this is the percentage. So you can see the different categories. The seizure disorders, 55% of the time. Again, in a 20-minute study, you have a little over half a chance of seeing a discharge. So in known people that had a history of seizures, we found just a little over half of them were detected in the routine clinical EEG. If you do a routine EEG and you have a strong suspicion based on clinical experience with a person that they probably have a discharge, but we just didn't catch it. That's when you either order a sleep-deprived EEG, which increases the likelihood of a discharge by 50 to 70%. Now, most people think, oh, how do you detect seizure disorders in EEG? Well, photic stimulation. That's how you get it. Well, that gives you 4% additional yield above the base eyes open, eyes closed recording. It's not really a source of gigantic yield clinically, diagnostically. 4%, not much. I don't go to Vegas for 4% yield, you know.
Everybody does, Jay. Do you have a system?
You don't go there for the yield anyway, you know. You go there to lose money, not make it.
Mine is 400.
But sleep deprivation gives you a 50 to 70%. Now you might consider going to Vegas. 50%, at least you come back with the, you know, 50-50, but 70% you're coming home with some dough, you know. So your odds become much more favorable. Why does sleep deprivation increase the yield? The transitional state between wake and sleep, wake and drowsy, is an unstable moment. You're not stably awake, you're not stably asleep. And during that chaotic transition, discharges are potentiated. Transitional states bring out transience. So you come in sleep deprived and you're going, you know, in and out of levels of consciousness, and the potential for discharge happens. Excuse me again here.
Wow, is silent at the same time?
I have to, but I wake up in the morning not having drank all night, and I have diabetes insipidus. You know, I wake up badly dehydrated, and I have to just chug water, and it just zoop right. You know.
Jay, well, thank you, and that was. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm glad you're getting the hydration. I'm sorry. Yeah. So thank you for finding this paper. This is exactly what I needed. And it came up because a few weeks ago, Josh Moore, somebody made the case that it's a common argument you hear these days that, you know, autism spectrum isn't really a disorder and ADHD isn't really a disorder. It's just a different way of being. And Josh made the point that, well, as many as 86% of autistic patients may have these epileptic discharges. And sometimes it can even result in death, you know, and I think he said, you know, that doesn't sound very healthy to me. I'll also add, Jay, one last thing, and then you can comment. There are clinical trials with Lamictal or lamotrigine, which is an anticonvulsant, that show symptoms improve in something like 80-something% of autistic patients when they give them an anticonvulsant. And so, I don't know. It feels like maybe if we knew that we could treat these disorders, people wouldn't feel that way. Go on.
Yeah, I would consider giving an anticonvulsant to somebody with that diagnostic category if they had epileptiform content in the EEG. If they didn't have epileptiform content, it's not really appropriate.
Sure.
You know, so rather than base it on the DSM, let's base the intervention on the EEG, which is prognostic. The EEG is only diagnostic. It doesn't tell you what's going to work necessarily.
That's what I really, really, really wanted to comment. I think when we were talking with Josh, the issue is the garbage basket classification, you know, and that's where, you know, ADHD isn't really blah, 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 and autism isn't really blah, 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 because everybody is throwing you know, children and now adults into those classifications. So I think it's the apples and oranges when we're talking about true blue ADHD and true blue autism, then we can talk about, you know, those type of numbers.
So rather, you know, if you have a DSM category, it's used as a pejorative. Oh, that's bipolar, or that's an ADD, or you have autism. You know, like autism is something you can freaking catch. You know, ooh, you know, it's transmissible. But you know, if you get away from the diagnosis and you look at the EEG, there's nobody says, oh, you get frontal alpha. I mean,
Yeah.
the pejorative is gone. You can look at the pathophysiology and talk about how to optimize brain function, and most of the divergent things that are happening that aren't helpful
There you go.
can be fixed. But neurodivergence also has a gift. If the number of extraordinarily creative people that were neurodivergent, there's a T-shirt with a whole bunch of them listed, and they line up differently, but it spells autism, and Mozart and Einstein, and the it's a different way of perceiving things, and sometimes a different perception is what we need. And to get a clear perception of what you're looking at, you have to have another perspective,
Well, and yes, and so certainly there's studies showing ADHD. Let's be loose with the categories, but people showing some of these attentional symptoms often have greater creativity. That's fine. I would just say, many of these prodigies throughout history were very tortured individuals, unfortunately. And so I like what you all said about optimizing brain function. That maybe is a more palatable way to describe. We want to help the person adapt, but not necessarily change who they are, I guess, which is the truth. I mean,
not to make a shameless plug for the Suisun Summit, but
go for it, Jay.
2026's themes, there's two themes that are happening. One is the Godfather goofiness, but the other one is the gift of neurodivergence. And we have a presentation from Teresa Strokel-Drax, MD, PhD out of Munich, and many years ago in a workshop in Cancun, she asked me to look at some data, and she ended up working with Dirk de Ritter to actually analyze some of the data. But she was working with kids that had an excessive, that they would take care of other kids to their own detriment. They were super caring in some way. And she finds a Mu-like phenomenon of hyper mirroring. And so she's coming to talk about the hyper mirroring, and it's a neurodivergent pattern, but it's not a pathology, it's a style. And again, you don't need to pathologize it. If there's an aspect of the brain function that you want to optimize, we can always do that. But if you're having difficulty with social perception, we can work on the social perceptual areas and affective regulatory areas and optimize your function. But we don't necessarily pathologize that.
I want to make a general comment here, just in terms of culturally what's happening. And between the DSM and the school system, and really, really huge class sizes that are normal or normative, has gone. I always say the world takes all types, right? And our normative in terms of our outliers that don't do well in school, or it's just. Our normative is getting narrower and narrower and narrower, and the scope of the DSM was getting broader and broader and broader. And I would say the learning deficits and the behavioral issues of children, whether in school or parents, again, was getting broader and broader and broader. You guys have heard me say this a million times. A little 5-year-old who rolls around on the floor and screams does not have a behavioral issue. They're a 5-year-old child, and you coach them, you parent them, et cetera, in terms of, where that's more appropriate to do or not. It speaks more to the anxiety of the parent than it does the the issue of the child. So we have to be really, really careful of that. And it saddens me a little bit that we need to promote the neurodivergence, et cetera, all the quote unquote special things. It's because we've just tried to box people in all of these negatives. So I think we have to be really, really careful about that. And also, I mean, here's your clickbait here, Pete. But in terms of this focus on needing to find something special and accepting behaviors or attributes that aren't working for people or society as well. So, there's a whole line there that we have to undefine and redefine. So
and we have to change the language.
Yeah, and keep the conversation open, without people having fear of being canceled or fear of not being able to talk about things openly. So we have to get rid of the prejudices, but not go into superhuman specialties as well.
Yeah. So I have sympathy for people who maybe have been unfairly stigmatized or pathologized. But there is an element now, I think, of a reverse stigma. We need to balance. It's not going to be either one side, but I've told this story on here before.
The normies, right? You're a normie.
Yeah, look, the reality is everybody on this podcast right now is probably on some level neurodivergent. I mean, we wouldn't be here. I don't think I know somebody whose scan doesn't show one of the autism phenotypes, let's say, be it frontal slowing or T6 alpha or whatever. So anyway, I posted some data, maybe it was Pineda, maybe it was Jay, on how neurofeedback can help resolve symptoms of autism. And a mother of autistic children messaged me to say, how dare you? You are not allowed. It was in the most in-your-face means possible. Said, you are not allowed to tell me that autism can be treated because I'm diagnosed and my children are diagnosed and we've tried everything and nothing works. And it was basically friendship ending, and I tried to be diplomatic and it wasn't enough. So I think, and maybe it's understandable when people are being stigmatized. I get that.
But
they may
give
be
them
closing
some publications.
their mind. Yeah, go on.
Let's give them some publications.
That's what I do. But that's what I did. That's what triggered it. But anyway, go on.
So, this is a paper that was in Autism Science Digest, QG guided neurofeedback, and this is oriented to the parents because it's their digest. Now, it's not like a journal. They invite a paper and they might look at the grammar or something, but they're not going to change the science. They invite the paper from the group that they want to have, provide the information. So this basically starts very, very basic, the whole basics of how feedback is provided, the band ranges, what EEG, QEEG is all about, and then some of the clusters of findings that you can find within the autism spectrum. And at the you've got to personalize everything, and at the end there's a little anecdote about a specific client's recovery. But this was basically for parents, and if you're in the profession, you don't necessarily need to have it spoon-fed from the basics. And there's also a chapter. This is a chapter in a book about autism, and this is basically without the parental lead-in. This is the cluster discussion. So
that was good. That's helpful.
These papers can end up being well, this is a chapter in a book, so it's a little more difficult.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily get a book, but this chapter I think is something that everybody who gets the general handout if I'm doing consulting with groups. This is in that handout.
Dr. Marie, don't people fight hard for that label though?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, in Canada, we have a bit of a catch-22. I mean, very, very positive, when autism first really came on the radar. I mean, you knew. I mean, you didn't, quote unquote, need a diagnosis. You knew when a person had autism. I mean, whether it was the rocking or the stimming, the screaming, real extreme autism. And yeah, we support. So with diagnosis, young children can get $20,000 a year in paid for services, and it changes with the age. But I mean, these were the days where it was essentially confirmed that the younger you start to help somebody, the less divergent you are. Again, we have to be careful about that. But if you have a nonverbal older child or a young child that all they do is rock and run around, can't focus on anything. I mean, you all know the symptoms of autism. That's extremely helpful. So there is quite an advantage to a diagnosis. But we've now, we have all of the hard to assess, hard to notice, hard to find autism. And I just want to, colloquialize this a little bit, that good old expression, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay. If you have characteristics that are working for you, okay, in your family and your close friends and your work, then, God bless the quirks, as they say, right? So I think we need to, in that sense, we need to really accept. But I would say we have to be really cautious of individuals that show major compromise and need major assistance, not willing to explore any assistance or functional change, right? So this is where, again, we have to keep the dialogue open. So Anthony, I don't know what parent you were talking about, but if a parent is not prepared to seek assistance for the child in terms of, quote unquote, treatment or betterment of systems, but asks that the whole classroom be rearranged and asks for all of these other things, the kind of tail wagging the dog. So yeah, let's keep the dialogue open. That's all I can say. And risk saying some things that are going to offend people. Somebody's always going to be offended. Always.
It's true.
In Washington State, the parents sued the insurance companies for parity, and the insurance companies have to cover autism and pay, and they have to pay big, so up to $500,000 a year potentially. Wow.
So you want that assessment as well there.
Now, the insurance company, once the parents won that by a vote, basically, in court, they beat him in court, and so the insurance companies went to the legislature and said, okay, if we've got to spend all this money, I want you to set up a center of excellence system where the diagnosis can be done properly, not by the family doctor making a wild guess, oh, the kid's not behaving somehow, but actually an expert in the centers of excellence. There were 6 centers of excellence in Washington State initially. I think there may be more now, and if you get the formal diagnosis, then the insurance company has to pay out.
Hey,
But why do kids want that label though, Dr. Marie? Maybe not autism, but hey, I have ADHD or I have this, I belong to this group of people, and then the school administrators, they're incented to agree with that because they get more money in their budgets.
Yeah. Well, we had, it's starting to taper out a little bit. I think it's been overused, but until extremely recently, it was super cool to have a diagnosis, okay? Especially in adolescence, referencing, oh, my ADHD or my anxiety, or it was kind of like a status symbol. Versus, in my generation, it was ultra negative, like you would hide those things. If there was, oh gosh, with the special education room, I mean, kids would wait until the school bell had the second school bell had rung and everybody else was in the classes, and then go into the special education room when the halls were empty. So, I mean, it's really, really positive that it's not stigmatized. But now that it's reversely, it's a status. I'm really happy that that trend is starting to go down. Self-diagnosing with Dr. Google and TikTok and all of that stuff is just madness. Anthony, I can see you want to talk there.
Certainly that's true. As awareness increases, you're going to get some individuals who attach to it that maybe it doesn't describe some of these diagnoses or ADHD. But I want to resist. I mean, haven't we said on this podcast many times that modern life seems to be intensifying things like ADHD-like symptoms through the phones and through constant stimulation and lack of sleep. And so I resist the idea. There is an idea out there, both from clinicians and kind of from, I'll call them more conservative right-wing types, that this is all sort of a manufactured thing. I don't think it's manufactured. I think attentional symptoms are worsening.
I'm going to interrupt.
I think mood symptoms are worsening.
Because I'm not disagreeing with that component.
Great.
Okay, let's not polarize that.
Thank
no,
you.
Not at all. Not at all. We can, all of us, I know 100% agree that life is getting too complex, too busy. And when we're not busy, we're on these hyper arousal cycles with all our technology. So essentially we're go, 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 go. And then we just plop and we're always engaged in, essentially we're in training ourselves. This is hilarious. I just wrote a paper on this, which I sent in last night. But yeah, and they're all kinds of entrainment systems out there via our phones, our computers, the 5G, I mean, etc. So I do not disagree with you, Anthony, at all. We've all got to take it down a level. I mean, even all the good things kids are doing. I mean, good gosh, all of these extracurricular activities, running here, running there. Little children are getting home at 9 o'clock at night, and the sleep deprivation. We can go on and on and on. It's absolute madness out there, and we're deregulating because of it.
I'm a data sort of a person, so this is looking at a meta-analysis across a decade of the theta beta ratio.
Right.
And if you get right down to the data here, when it was first identified, the effect size was gigantic. The effect size is the ability to separate two groups. And across time, it's now become terrible. But it's easier to see that in this graphic. And this is the clinical group in 1999. This is the mean and standard deviation. This is the normative group, mean and standard. Their standard deviations didn't even touch. The two clusters were very well separated, 95 to 98% accurate identification of normal versus ADD. Now, across time, things at this point in time, the normal group is worse than the ADD group was in 1999. And what the hell has happened? On the average, there's 2 hours less sleep per night for adolescents since 1999 to now. And that's a lot of lost sleep. And you might also think in terms of some people that have sleep disorders that actually end up having their sleep disorder diagnosed as ADD. And one of those is circadian rhythm delay. And if you have a circadian rhythm delay, you treat it with bright light from the sun in the morning, and the desert Southwest has got a lot. This is solar intensity from the photovoltaic people. So desert Southwest has a lot of solar intensity. This is the incidence of ADD measured by CDC back when the CDC was a little bit more intact. Minnesota, there's a couple states that have their own definitions that are a little bit of an outlier, so you just kind of ignore those two. But you don't have as much solar intensity here as you have here. And the percentage of ADD is almost a 10% difference.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and the
we make
underlying
a joke now, Jay?
What's the joke?
We make a Florida joke now?
Yeah, the Sunshine State is not sunshine. That's what I would.
well, there's a lot of
cover.
it has cloud cover, and you know the photovoltaic people are honest about what how intense things are going to be.
We missed a bad opportunity there, Jay.
Yeah, but you know, and then this paper basically suggests that there's sleep phenotypes of ADD, and they say that a quarter to half of all the kids are diagnosed with ADD ADHD actually have a sleep problem. That can be a primary disorder, like almost like narcolepsy. They just cannot stay awake. And for them, they actually respond better to Provigil than they do to amphetamines. Amphetamines increase your arousal level, not your vigilance. And, you know, orexin is what you really need to stay awake. And you can have delayed circadian rhythm. And if you have that, you have a later life high probability of bipolar. You can have a phenotype associated with disordered breathing. You can have restless leg or periodic leg movement. And some people have epileptiform content in their sleep at night. If you're not sleeping at night, you're going to look inattentive during the day. And again, there's an overdiagnosis of ADD, ADHD when there's a basic diagnosis of a sleep disorder. Yeah. So anyway, I like to look at data. So.
Yeah. No, I love the sleep phenotyping. And Dr. Marty's right. I have a friend who has a the child's a teenager now, but he describes his son in every sport and extracurricular there is. But he says if my son sits down in a recliner or even in the car, 5 minutes, they're asleep. He says it doesn't matter if it's a 5-minute trip, my son's sleeping. Yeah. And it's sort of astounding.
5 minutes is the golden number. If you go to a sleep lab and you don't fit their profile perfectly, they can't get paid to do a sleep study, but they might get paid to do a screening. And the screening is 5 naps in the afternoon, an MSLT, multiple sleep latency test. Yeah. They don't hook up, they're not hooking up your breathing or your strain gauges. They don't care about body position. They just hook up some EEG and tell you to go lay down and take a nap. And if you fall asleep before 5 minutes with a vertex sharp wave indicating you're in stage 2 sleep, not just drowsiness, but sleep, at that point you've fallen asleep precipitously. If you average faster than 5 minutes, they can't deny the insurance coverage. You've passed your screening, and they have to pay for that coverage. Now, the insurance companies use that screening because they can avert some payments. And the screening is fairly inexpensive by comparison, and the all-night sleep study is expensive.
Mm. It's sad because it feels like there's so much a parent needs to know just from what you're telling me, if they're not lucky enough to listen to this podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I really feel for parents now. There's so much BS out there. I can't even be polite about it, and one of the big things is we've commercialized childhood to a degree that's insane. And also, what we're expecting kids to do. And then of course we just throw all these devices at them. It's really, really tough. Healthy kids should be able to self-entertain, play by themselves without devices, run around outside without fear. The world is actually safer now than it was in the 1950s when the kids used to run around in the streets.
Ooh, I like that.
But if you look at the data out there, I mean, the only thing really that people have to be more careful of is the speed of cars, right? But yeah, I mean, bring back old-fashioned childhood. It's better for parents and it's better for kids, right? And bring back the arts in school. Jay, you can run on this if you have some data in terms of, the scores of math when kids are in band, or when there are arts, the quote unquote reading, writing, arithmetic, all those scores go up when they have in school art activities. So it's absolutely correlated. So we're removing all of those. The kids are getting stupider, and they're not having any fun. And we're wiping out of all of our creativity. You know, where do you think the next generation of geniuses is going to come from? They're not going to be necessarily your best spellers. Okay, they're going to be the ones inventing words, right?
They quite often didn't come from school originally anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Dr. Mari, they say mind wandering increases creativity.
yeah.
Even intentional mind wandering. If you just set a a timer or something.
Yeah. The other is we're not integrating or assimilating knowledge. Okay, you need blank spaces. I wrote, Pete, time for my Seamus promotion, the iMinds book. It's all in there. You know, you need blank spaces to assimilate and integrate. You know, everything you've learned. Okay, you need these blank spaces to put it together and eventually see patterns and eventually have a thought on top of what you've integrated. And all of those last three phases just are not occurring. Kids know all this type of trivia. The quote unquote good students know how to regurgitate it very, very efficaciously. But try and integrate it, they're having a lot of trouble. And good old chat GBT and the writing of the papers for you. I mean, I'm sounding like an old fogey, but it's true. We're in trouble. Yeah.
You know, there's a wonderful foundational value to learning basic logic
Yeah.
and some philosophy.
Yeah.
And those subjects don't earn you a freaking dime. You know, you get a PhD in philosophy, what are you going to be? A bartender? You know, an author maybe, but they're not, they don't usually pay, but they're foundational for your ability to operate at a high level. If you don't have good basic logic techniques, you don't know how to think. So teaching those things is, I think, foundational, but it's, you know, when was the last time you saw logic taught in high school?
Well, it's starting in some good high schools. You're having philosophy and psychology. So that was something really, really nice to see over the last, let's say, 15 years or so. But I'm not going to blanket it because I'm not sure about it, but I know definitely in the universities in my hometown, and many of the others in Canada, you could not get a BA in any field at all without a philosophy course. You had to pass and take a philosophy course. You just couldn't get a BA without it, right? And some of them even had a psychology and a philosophy, but you had to take philosophy. Yeah. So,
well, if you want to be a lawyer, take the LSAT. One of, or at least it used to be 15 years ago, logic games was part of the LSAT. So a great leadership tool would be to send people to, there's this company called Kaplan that does accelerated learning to learn how to take that test so you can pass it to get in the law school. And it teaches you how to critically think, take a reading comprehension, take a lot of data in and how to, you know, parse it down. And it always made me wonder, why don't they teach that in all the schools, make that a thing that to learn how to critically think, because that's all AI is right now, is taking your queries to the next level, asking a more intelligent question. I wonder why they're not teaching that. And then what would the EEG show in critical thinking, Jay? Would I see a dead spot right here for me?
Pete, I think you actually sent your EEG in at one point, so
we've never been the same.
So I can't actually comment.
Doesn't hurt so much here, but right about here.
You know, you don't really see people at every single measurement in their EEG is at a perfectly normal circumstance. There's deviations that have a range of variability that are still fully acceptable as within normal range. If you look at a multivariate analysis of the EEG patterns, a divergence from the centroid is called a Mahalanobis distance. So you can be more divergent from the centroid with having a larger Mahalanobis distance. And the phenotypes are the directionality of the Mahalanobis distance vector deviation. Different phenotypes are different deviation, but the length of the deviation is clinical versus non-clinical. Years ago, they gave a puzzle to us, a series of monozygotic twins. One had chronic fatigue, one didn't. And we had to figure out which twin was sick. And everybody had a blinded group. I mean, you didn't know whether you're right or wrong. They didn't break the blind until after you presented. So you stood up and you said, I think this is the sick twin in this pair, and this is the sick twin in that pair, and this is the sick twin in that pair. And pretty much everybody who stood up remarked how fabulously equivalent the two twins' EEGs were. That you could match the twins together in pairs because of the EEG. That didn't surprise me one damn bit. Endophenotypic, the genetics clustered them together. So, but people bombed out. If they got 50% accurate, and that was about as good as you saw, I got 100% correct. And at the end, somebody said, "Well, what's the pattern of chronic fatigue?" And I said, "Well, that wasn't the question. The question was, which twin is sick?" And I just looked at the Mahalanobis distance deviation of the two people, and the one that was more deviant was the sick one. I don't necessarily when you ask me a question, I don't necessarily answer the question. I come up with my own,
Like an attorney, you answer the question that you want to answer, Ronald Reagan. But what kind of my point is, we're in the feedback business, right? So when somebody says, Pete is street smart, well, Pete grew up in the inner city, and I had more interactions or feedback from people that I can't act that certain way or I'm going to get smacked. And somebody from the country, doesn't have that feedback. So
hey, I'm from Fargo.
So what I just looked up
I'm in the middle. So one of the things I always talk about too is, direction versus correction. Okay. Just because you see it on the EEG doesn't mean you need to go after it, right? It could be working for the person. I mean, a hot cingulate is a really, really good example. I mean, some individuals are absolutely intolerable with their stubbornness, and what have you, like this can't deviate from any form of thinking. And other people, it's a sign of genius. When they latch on to something, they don't let go until they've really accomplished something. So this is where the symptom is there a reason why a person is in front of you, and can you match that reason with something in the EEG? So don't just go after the EEG, and don't just go after the symptom. You have to pair them for
some divergent patterns are adaptive, and you don't want to, just because it's not at the mean doesn't mean you should fix it, because it may be a special skill.
Bingo.
Guys,
now,
like Anthony was saying,
I'd like to point to Gerard Finnemore, works with elite athletes that are ultramarathoners, the people that run for like 4 or 5 days and run over mountain ranges, and people die during the race. Those people. And some of them that row across the Atlantic. Those kind of people. Elite extreme athletes.
Yeah.
The commonality is an anterior cingulate. If you're not obsessed about it, you're going to quit. I rode halfway across the Atlantic it's pretty good. I'm feeling good, but I'm running low on grub, and this is good enough. I'm gonna dial it in. I'm checking out. I'm not gonna make it all the way to Florida. I'm here near the Bahamas. I'm gonna quit. So,
Guys,
but the elite athletes have that cingulate lock, and they won't let go.
Yeah, and you don't want to train that out. So when you're dealing with, like, for example, a teenager with incredible athletic promise, and a teacher or parent that says they're a pain in the butt, that boy, oh boy, do you have a long conversation. You have a really long conversation.
And there's a difference between training something out and training control of it.
Yeah.
I like that.
Because you may be just fine when you're rowing across the Atlantic, but when you get home, what is that doing?
Yes.
So,
yes.
in the NFL, people that have kind of washed out, but they might get brought back in. There's actually a group that end up having a spot where they can go. It's a big training camp kind of an environment, and some of them get neurofeedback. And if you can't sleep, they do SMR. But some of them feel like they lost their drive because the beta went down and the SMR went up. And they then need to learn how to control their beta. You can return it, but don't just let it run wild out of control. You don't want to be impulsive if you're a lineman. You will false start, you get penalized, and your coach is gonna, you won't be in the NFL very long if you
not for long.
Guys, I got to take a controversial viewpoint here, and I'm open to much of what you're saying, but a lot of these people, I think your relationships are the gauge. I think your relationships are the judge, because here's why. At end of life, when they ask people what was most important to them, they say their relationships. And a lot of professional athletes, they're kind of famous for having awful relationships. And if you want to get more critical thinking, I just looked up Oxford.eu, or their education department. They say perspective taking is key to critical thinking, because you have to compare various viewpoints. So I thought Pete's point about, well, how do you be street smart? Relating to people is a lot of it. And I think what kids many times are missing is empathy. And I think their empathy actually could get them further. The empathy that I find when I read, it's situated in the frontal lobe. That's where a lot of logic is occurring as well. And the sleep erodes that. How many studies are there that say your emotional control and your empathy goes down when you don't sleep? Okay, marital troubles when people don't sleep. But then also it goes back to I-minds that Dr. Mari talks about, last thing, which is that mu only suppresses when people view biological motion. It does not go down, meaning the frontal lobe is disconnected when kids are looking at, they have them literally studies with robots and with video. So while you're looking at those things, it's more easy for your frontal lobe to be disconnected, your empathy to be off, but also your reasoning and higher order thinking. So I worry that they don't have empathy in addition to attentional and focus and all these things that we're worried about.
I think Jay kind of answered that a little bit. It's in terms of, the training it to go on and off, right? And I also think some introspection as well, that as I said, there's a lot of genius and talent that comes with that. But what's the difference between arrogance, which arrogance to me is a choice, versus, empathy. So I think if you, it's funny, persons are coming to mind now in terms of, people that I know with really, really hot anterior cingulates that you wouldn't want to change it for the world. But they don't live in that spot all the time. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
But I think, parenting, is a big one. And training out the arrogance, not the, a lot of the terms, single-mindedness, these are negative, but the supreme focus, sure, there is a price to it, but when you're not in that supreme focus, can you turn it off? And I think that indicates the functional success of a person, meaning they can have relationships and good ones.
I love it. We all hear the story about the lawyer who can't turn it off when he goes home and everything is an argument. You know, when you're a hammer, everything is a nail. What's Jay doing there? Time?
Pete.
Yeah.
I got a 9 o'clock.
Anthony Ramos, Jay Gunkelman, Dr. Marie Swingle. Another great episode, NeuroNoodle Feedback Podcast. Hey, where do we get the content? It's from you. Every Wednesday, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. Everybody, have a great weekend.
Hey, everyone. If you're enjoying the show and want to help us keep it going, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support helps improve the content and brings on great guests and grow the show. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/NeuroNoodle. But hey, if supporting financially isn't in the cards right now, no worries. You can still help us out for free by liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode. It really makes a difference and helps more people find the show. If we've earned it, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. The NeuroNoodle podcast is supported by listeners and businesses just like you. Hey everyone, here's a quick message from our good old buddy Joshua Moore at Alternative Behavioral Therapy.
I'm preparing to do an introduction to QEEG phenotypes. This is my first workshop on the topic, and this is just the introductory overview of the project. This is going to be very, very basic. So let's review each phenotype. We're just going to go through them one by one. If you look at the DSM 1, 2, or 3, and you look at the first chapter, it actually acknowledges that the DSM in mental health is just, quote, a descriptive adaptation, unquote. We're going to customize the interventions and tailor them to the individual's brain activity, not just applying the treatments or trainings to the individual's phenotype and maybe even their variants, but also customizing the protocols themselves to fit that person's individual unique frequency patterns. Maybe a dozen ways to have excessive energy in your nervous system, and then there's an infinite amount of ways to relate poorly to that excessive energy, which means that there is a lot of variations in what someone might call anxiety, and that doesn't mean that we're talking about the same thing when we're talking about anxiety. So complicated stuff. But when we look at a brain map, we get some basis for which we can start talking about what is this energy. Then we have to go to the client. We have to start talking to the client about what is your association to this specific kind of energy that I can see now. Then we get to care about things that insurance doesn't restrict us on. We get to care about like the person in a broader way. 85% improvement in mental health report following pairing a medication with a specific phenotype. You know, geez. Okay, have you seen 85% in any mental health studies for any medication? I'm going to be going over a whole bunch of different types of tests, assessments, and things that can be used that have things called neurocorrelates, which you saw some of those already. Better success outcomes. That's what we really want. We need better predictive power. We need better individualization. That's what we want.